Hopefully you just watched my video on the mounting process. In this bonus video, I asked Evan Yu about the mounting process, and he gives us a tour of the code base right there on his computer. I found this extremely validating, and it does a great job of reinforcing everything we just learned. He also ends up painting a picture of how the code base is going to change in Vue 3.
This is totally correct. Yes, you can add additional platforms. If you look at the source code, there is a Weeks platform, right? So I can actually go into the source code and show you platforms, right? So we have Web and Weeks. Inside Web, we have a bunch of entries, right? So if you look at the build script, you'll notice that these entries corresponds to the files in the dist directory that we actually ship onto CDNs, right? This is the entry for Vue template compiler. This is the entry for the full Vue.js. This is the Vue.runtime.js. Right? And so let's take a look at what the entry runtime is doing. It's simply importing runtime index. And the runtime, so the reason that these code live in this directory is because they contain platform-specific code. And by platform-specific, I mean things like these, right? Attributes, class, DOM properties, DOM events. These are things that would only exist in the browser. And if you make use of, say, things like set attribute, right? This is a browser-only thing. Right? So if you run this code in Android, it doesn't make sense because there's no browser to be speaking of. So this contains all the code that will execute in the browser runtime environment. So any coding here can assume there's a window, there are DOM APIs available, and all that. So we have these modules. So vShow has special handling because it has to deal with CSS. vModel has special handling because it has to deal with all the native input types on web, like buttons, checkboxes, radio buttons. The runtime index does something that is really important. That's here, right? Vue.prototype._patch. So this special thing is quite important. This is our virtual DOM patching algorithm, right? So in here, we are setting it to this patch function, which comes from here, right? And inside here, we notice that this patch function is created by this createPatch function. And createPatch function is what core VDOM patch exports. Right? So createPatch function is completely platform agnostic. It's a pure JavaScript only virtual DOM diffing algorithm. This is a factory function, right? It takes some options, and the options are modules and node ops. Right? The modules contain things like class diffing, attributes diffing, style diffing, all the logic for that. These are browser-specific modules that's injected into the core patching algorithm. So once this patch function is created, it keeps track of the list of the modules that has been injected. So when it's diffing or patching two vnodes, it knows like I have to compare their class, I have to compare their styles and their attributes because of these modules that are injected. And the node ops are for when the patch algorithm actually needs to do something, right? So for example, we compared two lists of children and we found like, okay, this node needs to be removed. So I know it needs to remove the node, but I don't, inside the platform agnostic code, I don't want to call out to document dot something, right? That's a browser only API. So I call out to node ops dot remove node, right? And because node ops is injected, it's up to the eventual like platform to decide what these node ops actually do. And in the web's case, we simply call out to document APIs inside these. And if you're looking into the Weeks implementation, we have something very, very similar. The structure is almost identical, right? The difference is inside the Weeks patch function, inside the node ops here, you have this document is actually a Weeks document. This comes from, see, this is actually a Weeks document. This is not a browser document. So Weeks document abstracts all the operations in the Weeks runtime, which then calls out to native rendering engines to perform the correct operations on iOS and Android. So by injecting custom node ops, custom patch functions, and custom modules, so you'll see like Weeks is trying to mimic what Web provides. That's why its modules looks very similar. However, if you want to use Vue for something that's not Web at all, it's totally possible. You can like just mimic the structure here and create your own platform runtime. And you also can create platform-specific compiler implementations, because the Vue compiler is also modular. So you can tell the Vue compiler to compile class style props differently depending on the platform you're in. So this is what Weeks is doing, because in some cases, your different algorithm for different platforms will be different. So and directives can also be different. For example, in Weeks, there's only one type of input element. So you don't have to care about checkboxes or select or anything like that. So it's much easier here. Cool. So as you can see right now, this is kind of intertwined with the core code, because platform code sometimes will import core code, and all of these are living under the same source file directory, and they are eventually built into JavaScript bundles. So the separation of concerns is not super clean. So what we want to improve, so and as a result, implementations like NativeScript Vue and Vue Blessed, they actually all have to fork Vue and then add their own platform directory here. Then they're essentially building out of their fork, right? The good part is the core part. They just need to occasionally sync with core, but that's still suboptimal, right? So in Vue 3, what we want to do is provide a first-class custom renderer API. So, and by that time, everything under here can be split out to individual packages, and they just import the Vue core runtime, implement their abstractions on top of it, and they can ship their Vue-based solutions.
Nice. Yeah. It's interesting how we can begin to see how Vue is going to change as we approach Vue 3 and become more modular. In the next video, we'll jump into a killer feature of Vue, scoped slots.